The Shivering Truth is another interesting show from Vernon Chapman and the good folks at PFR. It's a stop-motion animated mind trip about love, life, and the meaning of it all. Being a huge fan of the creator's previous works, as well as a fan of this animation style in general, I was going to watch Shivering regardless of anything. What I wasn't expecting to find was one of the most unique and poignant pieces of art that I have ever seen. Shivering is a show like no other, a truly special work, and, despite the show's departure from Chapman's previous work and style, is something I can wholeheartedly recommend to anyone and definitely fans of his previous work. And, if you'll give me some of your time, I think we can come to understand why. The biggest departure, I think, for most people is going to be the total lack of any protagonist, or any recurring characters at all for that matter, unless you want to count the narrator as a character.
Not to mention the fact that lies attract bunnies.
Xavier carried his show. I think I made the case for that pretty clear.
Why are you huddled messes writhing in vagabondage?
Shivering sets itself up as an anthology, but what that means is that there is much less to become familiar with. There are no recurring characters. There is no overarching plot. Every episode is a blank slate, a reset to zero. Now, abandoning these time-honored conventions of storytelling could be seen as needlessly obtuse or pretentious to some, so I feel it would be best to talk about why these structural changes occurred and how they added to the show. To put shortly, it's to contrast the mundane and the absurd. Shivering depicts people from all walks of life, all ages, all ethnicities. Instead of focusing on one person's particular struggles, it focuses on a multitude of people's similar struggles to make a point about everyone's ultimately identical struggles. Wanting to understand, wanting to be understood, wanting to love, wanting to be loved, and so on. To aid in this goal of depicting humanity as a whole, and not from the perspective of any one character like Xavier, regular characters had to be done away with. You aren't meant to slowly come to understand a character as you watch their journey unfold and learn more about them, nor are you supposed to take comfort in a common cast whose dynamics are mostly unchanging. You are given a window into the lives of people as they are. This is why every temporary protagonist is introduced with their full name, as well as what they're currently going through.
But Mervyn Blanchard was one of the kookiest goofballs on planet Earth.
Ultimately, I believe this approach is a means to an end that a lot of the stranger creative choices in Shivering are trying for, to be both familiar and surreal. In Xavier, and basically all of its Adult Swim peers, the protagonist of the show isn't just the lens, but the driving force of the show. You're no longer watching Xavier, the unholy abomination, as he wanders and rambles through an absurdist nightmare land. When you have an absurdist protagonist in an absurd world, it's a lot harder to empathize with what they're going through, since at that point you're 2 steps out of reality. Now, obviously, you're not supposed to empathize with Xavier most of the time, if at all, but what if you were? What if someone wanted to create something that had 1 foot in reality and 1 foot in the surreal? What if it wanted to be mundane and absurd? This is the thing that makes The Shivering Truth totally unlike any other piece of media that I've ever seen. It is simultaneously way too weird and way too real.
I don't know how to take care of it.
Got you covered. Just feed the goddamn thing till it moves out or goes to jail.
By looking at normal people who talk normally in these unspeakably strange situations, you're forced to grapple with the same feelings of dread and confusion the characters on screen are almost always going through as well. Watching them traverse a world they can't even begin to comprehend and seeing them still desperately trying to cope with it creates a feeling of deep discomfort, at least in me anyway. I feel one of the best ways to demonstrate it would be to go over a brief scene from fairly early on in the show, in the episode The Nurple Rainbow. So this guy, Doug Dwyer, is at his mundane desk job where he's asked to hit numbers on his keyboard randomly.
Just type random numbers as fast as you can. See? Bing, 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 bing. That's it. Easy peasy.
How absurd. However, he simply isn't outputting enough numbers to avoid reprimand from his boss. Doug is troubled by the idea of acting without thinking, just going through the motions being a cog, but his boss simply refuses to acknowledge Doug's feelings.
Don't think about it. Just type. It's random.
I know, but I still want it to be good.
Well, it isn't good.
His unflinchingly emotionally distant scolding is interrupted, however, when his boss finds a hole in the back of Doug's head, with a monster living in it. His boss feeds the monster and continues to just totally blow off everything Doug is saying about this monster in his head.
What is it?
What is it? Come on, Dwyer. How the hell am I supposed to know?
After getting puked on, his boss gives him one last tongue lashing before leaving.
You're on thin ice with this nonsense, Dwyer.
I'm sorry. Here, let me help you wipe that up.
Just get back to work.
And then coming right back with a flashlight. He prods around in Doug's head until he finds that the monster is birthing more monsters. Doug expresses concern, but then the newborn starts screaming, despite this obviously being totally out of Doug's hands, since it's, in his head. His boss begins reprimanding him about the noise. Doug tries his best to solve his serious problem, not for himself but for the workplace environment, but gets fired regardless. He swears revenge, but he's just a little too loud. He has a panic attack, and then the vignette ends, fade to white. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. The absurdity is obvious. This man has weird monsters in his skull, how absurd. But the mundanity, the key to why this show works, is with Doug. His behavior in the scene is just a little too real. I'm sure we all know what it's like to be in an uncomfortable situation with someone who just does not care about you in any capacity. But society's expectations are dictating your actions, but you're getting anxious and they still don't care, and it's just a mess. This commitment to showing real people behaving in ways that are just too real as something absurd happens is the crux of the show, as I see it. A lot of promotional material for the show describes it as having dream logic, and I think that's fitting, because while a dream can and will feature perversions of reality as you understand it, you are you in your dreams. The things around you might change, but you still behave as you would. Seeing normal people in absurd situations is usually just the beginning of a prank, an incidental part of the surrealist piece. It's like an episode of Eric Andre, but the show is about the interviewee and not the interviewer. Thankfully, there is at least one concrete thing to comprehend, or rather, one plastic thing, the visuals. Stop motion has never been a particularly popular form of animation due to being unspeakably difficult, even by the standards of animation. Shivering manages to set itself apart immediately with its extremely high quality models and generally pretty pleasant visuals. A contrast between this and Xavier is difficult to avoid because they do at least appear antithetical. Xavier was all about low fidelity models and animation to engender a sense of unease. Shivering, on the other hand, is much better looking, so it must be going for something else then, right? Well, it's not quite that simple. See, Shivering's art style has a far more powerful tool to mess with the audience's emotional state than being unimaginably ugly, the uncanny valley. Stop motion animation is interesting because it is simultaneously real and unreal. You can tell that what you're looking at is obviously a cartoon, but it's still something physical you can reach out and touch. These tiny plastic representations of people are just that, representations, but they and the world they occupy is still objectively tangible in a way that traditional animation simply isn't. In addition to that, because the show is so dead set on depicting humans as they are, the inherent exaggeration in animation that would normally alleviate this feeling is absent. You're essentially watching what your brain is telling you is real and fake at once, and it's just an uncomfortable feeling that never goes away. Ultimately, it feels apathetic to the viewer as well. Xavier was almost all ugly all the time, and while Shivering can be just as ugly, there are moments of genuine beauty depicted in Shivering fairly frequently. They all still represent the surrealist angle, but from two different perspectives. Basically, Xavier was trying to make a point about a certain broad range of topics, and its visual style was representative of that. Shivering is making a far broader point about humanity as a whole, and its visual style needs to be diverse and malleable enough that it can depict antipodal emotions in the same breath. Whew. It needs to be capable of showing immense ugliness and immense beauty without resorting to art style shifts like what would happen in Xavier. It needs to keep visual continuity. This commitment to a single visual style may seem restrictive, but the style they've chosen has a lot more freedom than the one used before. But while some things changed, there's one thing which I feel is almost a straight upgrade from Xavier, and that's the voice acting. Now, Xavier's voice acting was not by any stretch of the imagination bad.
This is no longer a clue. It's a game. You may have just gotten checkmate, but we're playing Chinese checkers. And as my old friend Confucius say, the hunter has become the hunter Ed.
However, what Shivering is going for is basically incompatible with how it was done before. Being all about individuals who are seen for a few minutes and then discarded, it was critically important that even the most minor of minor characters truly have their own voices. This is not an easy task, but by really reaching out with his connections, Chapman is able to fill out his cast everywhere from people in all walks of entertainment. Big name actors.
The government personally requested that you, the best poet on earth, come read his super not boring, not lame, not solipsistic, indulgent, narcissistic, vapid, deluded twaddle. Come on, let's move!
Fellow showrunners.
Sorry for the wait, Mr. Lawson. We got your results, and I'd better be quick because you only have about 34 seconds to live.
Podcasters.
Sometimes I think you're falling on purpose to avoid grappling with life's real challenges.
All of this comes together to really bolster up that feeling that you're looking at people, not representations of people, just people. Everybody talks with their own unique inflections and subtle dialects. Unless it's an in-universe character, it's committed to sounding as naturalistic as possible. Also, there's no easier way to get someone to deliver a joke than to just hire a comedian.
Right, I'll just hold everything in my arm worms. And waste the energy that you could have used to help poor people.
And so, through the stellar voice acting, excellent animation, and part real, part surreal tone, what you're left with is a show that feels like it's intruding somewhere very strange in your mind. It doesn't aggress onto the viewer as hard as Xavier did in some ways, but it's just as crude and juvenile in other ways. You think, oh wow, cute models, naturalistic voice acting, and it disarms you to the bewildering intensity of the actual show itself. It strips you down and then shows you something best appreciated on this base, almost carnal level. Disregard plot, disregard characters, just experience. It's just that, an experience, and all of the tools of storytelling it uses to get you to that experience they're just formalities. How you personally interpret that experience is going to come down to who you are as a person, but if you'll allow me to get cheesy for a moment, we're all just using different words to describe the same feeling. The world is confusing and sometimes scary. This show is confusing and sometimes scary. That's it, that's the Shivering Truth. Pulling back though, one of the things about Shivering that really makes me happy actually has nothing to do with the show itself specifically. It's how it was received. Adult Swim uploads clips to the show, typical stuff, and the people in the comments are confused, as they should be, but not about the lack of structure. They're confused in the exact way the show is trying to make them confused. And it's not the kind of confusion that you can really explain away. Xavier's a show you could analyze thoroughly and understand all the little messages about society that it's trying to convey, and that's all well and good, but that doesn't quite apply to Shivering. The discomfort isn't a natural consequence of the kind of story being told. The discomfort is the story. Everything about it, from its visuals, to its acting, to its narration.
Everyone cursed with belief in their creator was finally useful.
To its structure is solely meant to disorient you in a way that keeps you wondering how you're supposed to react. Sometimes people act like normal people, and sometimes they declare you to be their king. What's real? I don't know. Tough to say. I guess, in the end, the real Shivering Truth is the nightmares we made along the way. I should have axed that one. Hey, thanks for watching this video about cartoons. If you'd like to watch some other videos about cartoons, I've got a few of those. I'd like to make, a few more. I'd like to thank my one and only beautiful patron, AssBlaster69. If you'd like to also be thanked at the end of every video, there's a link you can follow where you can help me out, give me some cash, and get up on here. Alright, okay, thanks. I love you. Bye.